Cadillac Coupe de Ville. By 1960, Cadillac had just come off the wild excess of its 1,959 models, and the Coupe de Ville became the perfect day after the party car, still dramatic, but a little more grown-up and refined. The de Ville name had only become its own series in 1959. For 1960, the whole line was restyled with smoother, more restrained surfaces, a full-width grille, a cleaner front bumper without the pointed bullets, and lower tail fins with neater oval tail lamp housings, giving the big coupe a sleeker, less flamboyant look while keeping its unmistakable Cadillac presence. The pillarless hardtop roof floats over a big greenhouse, and with fender skirts and wide white walls, the car seems to glide even at a standstill. Under the skin, it carried Cadillac's familiar 390 V8 in standard tune, making about 325 horsepower through a Hydra-matic automatic, enough to move this 4,700-pound, 225-inch long hardtop with the quiet, effortless surge buyers expected. About 21,585 were built with a base price around $5,252, so it was aspirational but still within reach of prosperous middle-class professional. Ford Thunderbird. When the 1961 Thunderbird arrived, it marked the start of a new third generation and a clean break from the chunky square bird that came before, trading boxy lines for a sleek, almost futuristic shape that quickly earned it the nickname Bullet Bird. Built on a new unibody platform with a 113.2-inch wheelbase, it was slightly longer and lower than its predecessor, and designer Bill Boyer's team wrapped that structure in a body that looked like it had been shaped by the wind. Pointed nose, deeply sculpted sides with a javelin-like character line, and a tapered tail capped by round jet-inspired tail lamps. Under the hood, Ford standardized on one powertrain for 1,961, a 390 FE Series V8 rated at about 300 horsepower, paired with a 3-speed Cruise-O-Matic automatic, giving the Thunderbird the kind of smooth, effortless surge that fit its personal luxury mission better than any raw muscle car persona. The 1961 Thunderbird paced the Indianapolis 500 and rolled prominently in John F. Kennedy's inaugural parade, high-profile roles that linked its space-age looks to the optimism of a new decade. Buyers responded, snapping up more than 73,000 Thunderbirds that year, including over 62,000 hardtops. Studebaker Gran Turismo Hawk. When Studebaker launched the Gran Turismo Hawk for 1,962, it wasn't really a brand new car so much as a brilliant piece of design judo by industrial designer Brooks Stevens, who was asked to stretch the aging Hawk Coupe into something that could stand beside Ford's Thunderbird in the personal luxury market, without the company spending money it didn't have. Taking the basic 1953-61 Hawk structure, he left the long hood and basic hardtop greenhouse but stripped away 50S fins and busy side trim, then overlaid a sharply formal, almost European suit. A Mercedes-inspired upright grille framed in a pseudo-radiator shell, a Thunderbird-style square roofline with thick C-pillars, and a Lincoln-like rear with vertical tail, lamps, and a brushed metal panel over the old grooved deck lid. The result, codenamed Hawk Monaco in prototype form, was sleek and surprisingly modern, and it arrived just in time to keep the Hawk name alive, when many expected Studebaker to kill it. In 1962, about 8,388 GT Hawks were built, a bright spot in an otherwise shaky sales year. Buick Riviera. When the 1963 Riviera first appeared in showrooms, it felt less like a new model and more like a completely new idea. General Motors' first true personal luxury coupe, created to give Buick its own answer to the Ford Thunderbird and Chrysler 300. The shape had an unusually pure backstory for Detroit. Born as Cadillac's XP 715 LaSalle concept under styling chief Bill Mitchell, inspired by the crisp knife-edged elegance of European Grand Tourers, then reassigned to Buick when Cadillac passed on it. Approved almost unchanged, the Riviera debuted in October 1962 on a shortened cruciform frame with a 117-inch wheelbase and its own unique E-body shell, deliberately limited 40,000 cars for 963 to preserve a sense of exclusivity. Power came from Buick's 401 Nailhead V8 rated at about 325 horsepower, with dual exhaust, later joined by an optional 425 version around 340 horsepower. In an era of fins and chrome explosions, Mitchell and stylist Ned Nichols delivered a car that looked like a bespoke, coach-built special. A long hood, short rear deck, thin roof pillars, and a taut greenhouse perched over flared fenders that pinch in at the waist to create a subtle, Coke bottle plan view. The Riviera quickly earned milestone car status, and design greats like Sir William Lyons and Sergio Pininfarina, Chevy Corvette Stingray Coupe. When the 1963 Corvette Stingray Coupe arrived, it felt like America's sports car had finally grown into the dramatic shape its reputation deserved. An all-new second-generation Corvette, renamed Stingray, and built on a fresh, shorter chassis with fully independent rear suspension that at last gave the car the handling finesse its looks promised. Styled under Bill Mitchell with major work from Larry Shinoda and others, the coupe drew inspiration from earlier Stingray Racer and other experimental projects, translating their sharp creases and hunkered-down stance into a production body that looked more like a concept car sneaking out of the design studio than a showroom model. For the first time, Corvette offered a closed fastback, and that Stingray Coupe came with the feature that would make 1963 unique: the split rear window, a dramatic backbone of fiberglass and chrome dividing the backlight into two panes, beloved by stylists and cursed by engineers and some drivers for its compromised visibility. Complaints meant the coupe switched to a single piece of glass for 1964, ensuring that the 1963 split-window cars would forever be one-year-only prizes. Chevrolet built 21,513 Corvettes for 1,963, split almost evenly between convertible and coupe, with 10,594 of those new Stingray coupes. Pontiac Catalina II Plus II Sport Coupe. The 2+2 package had debuted a year earlier as a sporty trim option on the Catalina, but for 1,965, Pontiac got serious. The 2+2 was repositioned as a true performance model, effectively a sub-series of the big Catalina line, still sharing the 1.21-inch wheelbase, perimeter frame, and full-size body, but now with real hardware to back up the badges, priced only modestly above a regular Catalina. The 2+2 sold roughly 11,500 units for 1,965, most of them hardtop sport coupes. What really makes the 1,965 Catalina 2+2 unforgettable, though, is the way that power is wrapped in one of the sharpest big car shapes of the decade. The all-new 65 full-size Pontiacs wore crisply drawn bodies with vertically stacked quad headlamps flanking a split grille that spears forward at the center, giving the 2+2's nose a subtle aggressiveness without any gimmicks. The Sport Coupe's pillarless hardtop roof flows gently into a long rear deck, and the side view is all tension and restraint. Out back, a full-width tail panel with integrated lamps and a tidy bumper visually plants the car on its wide track. Shelby Mustang GT500. Built by Shelby American in California, the GT500 sat above the high-revving GT350, was the first Shelby Mustang to carry a big block V8. Ford's 428 Police Interceptor, fitted with dual Holley 4-barrel carburetors and conservatively rated at about 355 horsepower and 420 torque, a combination that delivered effortless locomotive shove rather than peaky race car manners. Production was intentionally limited. About 2,048 GT 500 fastbacks for 1,967. So even when new, it was a rare sight next to ordinary Mustang. Shelby grafted on a longer fiberglass hood and nose with twin scoops, a bold grille with inboard driving lights, wide functional side scoops, and wide Le Mans stripes down the center, shouted its competition pedigree. Decades later, the basic silhouette would become a movie and star as Eleanor, in the 2000 remake of Gone in 60 Seconds, cementing the 67 GT500's image as the ultimate bad boy Mustang. Dodge Charger R/T. When Dodge rolled out the redesigned Charger for 1968, the R/T version was the meanest face of an all-new shape that seemed born to be a muscle car icon. The second-generation Charger abandoned the somewhat awkward first-gen fastback for a dramatic Coke bottle body. The sides swell over the wheels, pinch at the doors, then flare again toward the tail, all capped by a full-width grille with hidden headlamps and a tunneled back window framed by a flying buttress roofline. Underneath, it was still a body, but the proportions and surfacing were so different from the Coronet cousins that it looked like something from another planet. Dodge built somewhere in the mid-90s Chargers for 1,968, of which about 17,600 were R/Ts, and fewer than 500 combined those new lines with the fearsome Hemi figures that help explain today's feverish demand. The beauty of the 1968 Charger R/T lies in how it balances menace with elegance. A black 68 Charger R/T 440, playing the villain's car in bullet turned that silhouette into the definitive on-screen bad guy machine, Oldsmobile SO37. In 1967, when Canada was gearing up to celebrate its centennial and Expo 67, Imperial Oil decided that giving away ordinary Mustangs or Cougars wasn't nearly bold enough, so it commissioned king of the customizers George Barris to build a set of futuristic dream cars based on the new front-wheel drive Oldsmobile Toronado. 4 brand-new 67 Toronados were shipped from Lansing to Barris's Hollywood shop, where he cut them in half, stretched the wheelbase from about 119 to 134 inches, and created a 20-foot-long two-door lounge on wheels, with a 5th car reportedly kept for his own use. Mechanically, they remained very much Toronado. Steel perimeter frame, front drive layout, and a 7L V8, making roughly 386 horsepower. But each 67X was said to cost around $52,000 to build, more than many Rolls-Royces of the day, making them among the most expensive Oldsmobiles ever created. Esso used the cars as the ultimate grand prize in its Roadshow 67 promotion tied to Expo and the hockey season, complete with TV ads and even a folk-style jingle. Canadians collected road safety tip tickets at Esso stations for a chance to win one of the 4 cars plus a year of free fuel, insurance, and servicing. 2 cars were finished in gold, one in burgundy, red, and one in avocado green, all with matching interiors that glow under the vast canopy-like roof and huge rear window.